Hi, this is Jerry. Today, let's discuss one breaking news. Thousands of Airbus planes have been grounded after it was discovered that intense solar radiation could interfere with onboard flight control computers, leading to delays around the world. In a world dependent on uninterrupted air travel, almost nothing feels more improbable than thousands of commercial jets sitting idle on airport runways. Not because of geopolitics, fuel shortages, or pilot strikes, but because of the sun itself. Yet that is precisely what the aviation industry is grappling with today after Airbus confirmed that intense solar radiation, driven by unusual solar activity, has the potential to interfere with certain onboard flight control computers. Maybe you do not believe this is true, but it's happening now. This unprecedented revelation has triggered mass groundings across multiple continents, sending stock markets, airlines, insurance companies, and global supply chains into a state of turmoil. For decades, solar radiation has been a known background risk in aerospace engineering, but it has rarely manifested in operational disruptions at this scale. The current crisis, however, signals something far more consequential. The beginning of a new era where space weather risk becomes a real financial variable capable of reshaping both corporate earnings and national economic strategies. My goal isn't merely to report on grounded planes, it is to explain why this event matters economically, what structural weaknesses it exposes, and how global stakeholders should respond. Aviation's new black swan moment. The immediate impact was dramatic, with thousands of Airbus aircraft grounded for emergency inspections and software shielding updates. Major hubs such as Dubai, Singapore, Frankfurt, Paris, Chicago, and Hong Kong experienced cascading delays. Flight cancellations reached into the tens of thousands within 48 hours. Ticket prices on unaffected routes spiked 60 to 120% as airlines scrambled to reroute passengers using alternative aircraft types. From a financial perspective, this grounding is a black swan event, not because space weather is unpredictable, but because the aviation system is fundamentally unprepared for a systemic shock originating from outside Earth's atmosphere. Historically, operational risks in aviation have been categorized under three broad buckets. 1. Mechanical or design failure. 1. Human error, including pilot or air traffic control. 1. Environmental factors, primarily severe weather. But this crisis redefines environmental factor by elevating solar radiation, once considered a low-probability astrophysical anomaly, into a direct operational threat capable of shutting down global mobility. For investors, the message is simple. Tail risks are evolving, and they now include phenomena that conventional financial models rarely account for. Airbus, market panic, and the aerospace value chain. The immediate corporate casualty is Airbus. Shares slid sharply as investors assessed the liability exposure, regulatory repercussions, and the long-term reputational damage, even though both Boeing and Embraer experienced secondary aftershocks due to anticipated regulatory reviews on their own radiation shielding systems. The epicenter of financial risk sits squarely with Airbus. For Airbus, the financial risks include compensation claims from airlines for operational disruptions, cost of hardware retrofits or radiation-shielded replacements, acceleration of R&D spending to develop next-generation radiation-resilient avionics, potential regulatory fines if investigative bodies find insufficient preventative measures, long-term loss of market trust, especially among carriers reliant on tight utilization rates. More worrying for Airbus is the structural problem. Modern commercial aircraft rely on increasingly complex miniaturized avionics systems. Miniaturization boosts efficiency, but also increases vulnerability to charged particles from solar storms. Engineers call these events single event upsets, tiny errors in microprocessors caused by subatomic particles striking sensitive circuitry. If a root cause analysis confirms that radiation susceptibility is inherent in certain Airbus design systems, the financial implications could snowball into multi-year costs. The airline industry's financial strain. A crisis on top of a crisis. Airlines were already navigating a difficult macro environment, high fuel prices, tight margins, record pilot shortages, and inflationary pressure on maintenance and labor costs. This solar radiation crisis magnifies every one of those challenges. Short-term airline losses will be driven by passenger compensation, aircraft leasing of alternative fleets, crew scheduling disruptions, higher operational cost per available seat mile. Reputational damage as passengers lose confidence in flight reliability. Yet, the deeper concern is how fragile the airline business model truly is. The industry relies on high utilization. Planes need to be in the air as many hours per day as possible for carriers to remain profitable. With thousands of Airbus jets grounded, utilization collapses and fixed costs remain stubbornly high. Carriers operating Airbus heavy fleets, such as Lufthansa, AirAsia, Indigo, and many Middle Eastern airlines, will face disproportionate pain. Even profitable companies could temporarily slip into operating losses depending on fleet composition and exposure to long-haul routes. Insurance and reinsurance, the silent economic battlefield. Behind the scenes, insurance and reinsurance giants are preparing for what could be one of the costliest non-accident aviation payouts in decades. This event blurs the line between mechanical risk and act of nature, creating an underwriting challenge. Is the cause a design flaw within Airbus systems? Or is it an external event, a solar storm covered under force majeure clauses? Or a hybrid event that requires new contractual definitions entirely? Insurance companies worldwide are studying policy language carefully. If insurers determine the cause is a design issue, liability shifts heavily to Airbus. If classified as a natural disaster, insurers may face billions in claims. This crisis could reshape aviation insurance for years, with higher premiums, stricter definitions, and potentially new categories for space weather risk. Global supply chain disruption. When planes stop, economies slow. Grounded aircraft don't just affect passengers, they affect the global economy. Air freight accounts for just 1% of global cargo volume, but more than 35% of its value, including microchips, pharmaceuticals, luxury goods, high-value perishables, e-commerce express shipments. With thousands of Airbus A330, A350, and A320 family aircraft grounded, air cargo capacity shrank overnight. Freight rates surged as shippers scrambled to secure space on Boeing freighters and unaffected fleets. Countries dependent on air freight, Singapore, UAE, South Korea, Japan, and parts of Europe, faced immediate economic slowdowns. Even industries like manufacturing and biotechnology, which rely on time-sensitive materials, began reporting logistical bottlenecks. Air cargo is the hidden backbone of global high-value supply chains, and disruptions here ripple quickly into financial markets. Investors wake up to space weather risk for the first time. In the financial world, the biggest long-term impact may be conceptual. For the first time, institutional investors must treat solar radiation risk as part of mainstream risk assessment. Historically, risk models for aviation, satellites, and energy grids often included space weather only as a theoretical variable, rarely as a pricing determinant. Today's crisis forces a re-evaluation. Investment funds will now ask, how vulnerable are aerospace and transportation companies to space weather-driven disruptions? Do manufacturers have sufficient radiation hardening in avionics? Should airlines diversify fleets across manufacturers to reduce systemic risk? Will regulators impose more stringent radiation tolerance standards? A trigger for government action. Aviation security at a new frontier. Governments have been caught off guard. Aviation regulators worldwide like FAA, EASA, CAAC, GCAA are launching fast-track evaluations of existing radiation hardening standards, satellite-based monitoring tools for solar activity, emergency operating procedures, airspace risk categorization linked to geomagnetic storms. This crisis may mark the beginning of a new regulatory era where space weather resilience becomes as important as turbulence, avoidance, or lightning protection. We could also see increased investment in aerospace, R&D, international coordination on solar weather forecasting, mandatory avionics upgrades, stricter certification processes. Governments can no longer treat solar activity as an astronomical curiosity. It is now a national economic risk. The bigger picture. A lesson in global fragility. The grounding of thousands of Airbus aircraft is not merely an aviation story. It is a reminder of how interconnected and fragile modern systems are. One natural event, originating 150 million kilometers away, was enough to disrupt global mobility, corporate earnings, insurance markets, tourism sectors, high-value supply chains. This crisis exposes the illusion that technological complexity automatically equates to resilience. Complexity often multiplies vulnerability. The future of aviation depends on looking upward. As airports gradually return to normal and Airbus pushes software patches and hardware updates, financial analysts, engineers, insurers, and governments must collectively confront an uncomfortable truth. The aviation sector has entered a new era where risks from outside Earth's atmosphere can ground planes just as effectively as storms, strikes, or mechanical failures. For investors, this is a call to reassess risk models. For airlines, a warning about reliance on single manufacturers. For aviation authorities, a mandate to modernize regulations. For Airbus, an opportunity and obligation to restore confidence through transparency, innovation, and resilience. The sun has grounded the skies. The question now is whether the aviation industry will rise stronger in response.